Shelley Sacks, welcome to Radio Wolf. I'm so happy to have you here again and be able to talk to you. You are, in my eyes, and not only in my eyes, one of the main person who is really carrying Joseph Beuys' work about social plastic and understanding of our collective way of being artists of our humanness, let's put it that way, in your own way. And I find your work very inspiring. And
thank you, Tom.
One thing that you are doing is you are working in a very sensible way to bring together people globally in a deep rootedness, if I may say so, our earthly existence, but also our human expression of this. And you just started a project which is called 7,000 Humans, which struck me very much when I saw it, also because it was very open on your website. It is connected to an artwork of your teacher, Joseph Beuys, that he did in one of the art shows in Documenta in Kassel in Germany, where he planted 7,000 oaks in the city. And they are still there. When you go to Kassel, the oaks changed the city, which is in itself something very powerful. These little oaks that he planted something like, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago, are now changing a city that is a very modernist German city, and they do something. And it seems that what you're doing with your 7,000 humans connected to 7,000 oaks is connected to the spirit. If I just want to invite you to tell me a little bit, what is your motivation? What are you doing? What is this about?
Well, thank you, Thomas, for such a nice invitation and such an introduction. So 7,000 humans, which is also subtitled 7,000 trees, 7,000 commitments, 7,000 questions, has a direct relationship to 7,000 oaks. It's not only inspired by 7,000 oaks and refers to 7,000 oaks, it's actually, you could almost say, working in the sphere, in the dimension created by the trees now, first created by Beuys, and then the work that the trees have been doing to create this arena of, it's already an arena of commitment and determination, and now in a way the humans are being called to step up, to enter this arena and to work with this amazing deed that was done, that Beuys did in Kassel. It's not just an ecological act of planting 7,000 trees, and they're not all oaks, many people already know that, but they are the oak in a way, and the stone, this basalt stone, this ancient igneous rock that comes from fire, he did an act of reminding and calling us to an awareness. And it's actually in this awareness, it's almost like the trees, through their being, are carrying on, holding this awareness, holding the space, and just waiting for the humans to now consciously enter it as persons, each person like a tree, but together to find new forms of community, of collective being, of collective action, of conscious collective action. So we are actually working with the spirit of Beuys' deed, of the 7,000 oaks themselves, and creating, making visible and making conscious this arena actually that the trees are creating for us. It's a place for new vision, new narratives, if we want to use the contemporary language, new commitment to actually strengthen the humanosphere, to not only focus, which we have to and need to, on this critical situation of the whole biosphere and the planet, but to look at what the cold sort of humanity, the disconnected thinking, this is a strong theme in 7,000 Humans, how it separates us from the ability to respond, to care, to have real deep responsibility rooted in us. So it's about a lot of new rooting in the human sphere of capacities to work in this arena that Beuys created.
Mm.
Does that make sense to you?
It makes very much sense to me. And one reason why the spirit of what you're doing really hit me is that it seems to me that you're working with something that is so important for us as a species to work with right now, our social imaginary, where we use the symbolic reality of reality to connect with deeper parts of our souls. And I know you have a critical relationship to the word ritual, and I would love to talk with you about this. But it seems to me that what you're doing here, or what you and your friends are doing here, to be precise, is something that is an emergence of a global ritual that is based on a lot of symbolic reality that, as soon as it opens up to someone, becomes very powerful. First, all of us, I would say many of us, an oak tree has a symbolic power. When we think about, even more when we meet an oak tree, when we see the majesty of an oak tree, when we in the presence of an oak tree, something opens up. And that a so important artist like Joseph Beuys used his capacity as a prominent artist to basically transform a city with trees. That in itself already has a symbolic quality. On one hand, city, on the other hand, tree. There's a symbolic reality already, something in bringing the trees to the city. And then I just shared with you that my encounter with this art installation, if you may say so, what Beuys did there in the, I think, 1980s, early.
82, yeah.
That he planted these trees in a place that has a very symbolic reality for Central Europe. Because in Central Europe was Christianized around 600, and one of the big missionaries, he came from England, the Saint Bonifacius, he is one of the saints who missionized Central Europe, in particular also the Germanic tribes. He did something that in Central Europe history became a symbolic reality in itself. He cut the sacred tree of the Germanic tribes to prove the superiority of Christendom. And as it was told, and as the story goes, all the tribes basically expected him to be hit by lightning, and he didn't. So they got converted, allowed to get baptized through him. And he built a cathedral next to the place where the oak was. And this place is 10 kilometers outside of the city of Kassel, where something like 2,000 years later, a little less, a social artist like Joseph Beuys planted these trees. And this in a time where our reconnection to nature is one of our central human necessities that we have collectively to connect to and find a way to. And you're connecting to this and bringing this to the digital sphere, because I haven't mentioned that there's a website that people can connect to that. We will talk about this later. Yeah, everyone can, with the questions that you're bringing, which are questions that are related to our survival as species and the thriving of this planet, how we can connect to that. But all this seems to me to have this symbolic reality built in that reaches us, at least it reaches me on a very deep soul level.
It's an amazing story, an amazing connection you've made between Bonifacius and his act, that deed, and what that deed did, and what it makes me realize in that deed, and also then in what Beuys did. It sounds like in Bonifacius's deed, this Christianizing of Europe, and what you said earlier, how it overthrew in a way, or over subsumed the whole pagan life way of being in Europe. In a way, Beuys's deed in nearly the same place is almost a step. I'm sure Beuys must have known this story, but even if he didn't, it feels like it must have this awareness of the need to reunite, the almost the severing, that to some extent the separating people from the pagan being into a kind of institutionalized religion more and more and more. Beuys in a way reunited this possibility of finding our spiritual way totally connected to the other than human world. So it's a very amazing story, and definitely 7,000 Humans is trying to, you're right, I don't like to use the word ritual, and if you're interested, if you think it's interesting, we can talk a little bit about why. But in a way, yes, 7,000 Humans is working in the sphere of social imaginaries and all the symbolic dimension, symbolic reality that is as much of a reality, opening up this sphere, this portal. It's a portal into this potential for reuniting these dimensions that have got so separated. But there's another point I'd like to pick up in a minute. And when you say the oak is central to us all, and that one of the things that it's become totally apparent through 7,000 Humans, and in a way to me before, I come from other countries, not from Europe, is that for some countries, the oak is completely unknown. And that's also important. So what 7,000 Humans has partly done is to invite people to find their, not only their own individual tree partner and anchor point, but what tree in a way is real in their part of the planet. But it's something we can talk about later, but you'll probably have seen on the global map in 7,000 Humans that's online, we have no named countries or places. We have only one planet with many, many, many persons who are finding a partner, a tree partner if they have a tree, and otherwise another place or partner in the world where they can make an anchor point on this planet. So, but at the same time, it's become very visible and aware that for peoples all over, the equivalent of the oak it's usually something else. And so that's also very interesting how 7,000 Humans is in a way lifting Beuys's deed out of Europe, although Beuys was certainly working globally and internationally. But in a way, there's a very strong Eurocentric focus in Beuys's work. And what I think 7,000 Humans has the opportunity to do, partly through the streams I've brought in through my own non-European backgrounds and European backgrounds, and the many, many people who are joining us from all over the planet who are wonderfully bringing in these different streams that have a lot in common on the level of archetypes and a lot of difference in terms of the specifics of place and ritual and culture and background. So I don't know if that makes sense in terms of what we're talking about. And maybe we should just carry on for a moment about ritual, unless you want to take it somewhere else.
No, let's do both, because what you are saying about oak being not just an oak, or oak being the European, or at least Northern sphere incarnation of something that has different incarnation in other places of the world, changes the image. And that is in itself important. But that in itself, and you bring this in, also speaks to that already what you are doing, because you are asking people to find, and I just want to say this slowly, to find a tree or a place as a partner. It seems to be a kind of a word, or a power place, whatever you can find. That's words that would come. You choose a different word. And I think that's, again, related to the question of the ritual. You say, find a tree or a place as a partner. That evokes a lot in myself, at least. How can a tree be a partner? What does this even mean, to be a partner? And then, if somehow this lands in me to some degree, you ask me to engage with important questions of our collective questions of our time, not my personal questions alone, but our collective questions as a species or as inhabitants of this earth. And then you invite us, using modern technology, not only to kind of bring this on your website, and you mentioned the map where every single one who answers this question and brings in the partner has a sun place, you call it sun, that you see on the different places on this map of the globe, where all the suns shine up, or the people who participate, but then you bring them together over several weeks in the upcoming months to engage with each other. So there's a dialogical process unleashed that is rooted in what we said, is rooted in this partner relationship with trees, whatever this is, but it's also rooted in our connectedness, in our creativity. That in itself does something to us. I would call it a very powerful new form of collective global ritual. But I do understand that there's a problematic side to it, and I'm very happy to talk about this.
Thank you so much for that description of how it works. It's not just what you see. I think you've entered into it so deeply in a way that you can really live with how it works. Yeah, my problem with ritual, I suppose, comes from is because of its associations. It's easily understood as the opposite of science, of clear thinking, of facts. It's easily understood as linked to spheres of superstition. And it's also easily seen by people from, say, not European cultures, or cultures where the Enlightenment wasn't a central fact. It's easily seen now as being usurped, not just now, since maybe the 50s or 60s, but being usurped in quite a superficial way. Really the outer forms, without things really being understood. So it rings a lot of alarm bells for many people. And although from the way you described it, I would say you have every right and are correct in calling this, and I much appreciate how you see it, a global, a significant global ritual, or it might really become that. I still have and would avoid using that term. And however, I think the word is a really amazing word. And some years ago, I realized I actually learned from one of James Hillman's colleagues, Thomas Moore. He wrote a book called Rituals of the Imagination. And in this little essay, he speaks about how the word ritual has the same root as the word river in Sanskrit. And he goes on to say very simply that a true ritual puts us into the stream of being. It connects us with the stream of being. It opens the door. And a friend of mine in India, a philosopher artist, Jyoti Sahi, once said, aha, so that's why idols are the opposite. Idols are empty forms that no longer have their meaning. They've lost their meaning. And they become the kind of worship of idols, of empty idols. And when we were talking earlier, it was really interesting what you said about how my generation, our generation, we were trying to move away from empty forms, from given forms, given rituals. We questioned everything. We threw all habits out the window. And yeah, I think, you know, you were emphasizing that now there's a great longing you sense for new rituals and new forms. And I agree with you. And I think that's why it's ever more important to, if we're going to use the word, to really think what we're doing, because ritual in that sense of, in its negative sense of following forms, in a way is precisely what Beuys and the whole social sculpture field of ideas was also challenging, and would still challenge, that one of the things we have to be careful of, and we see it in many of the negative social movements that are happening right now, one of the things we have to be careful of is following without consciousness, following without understanding, this following of forms or ways or sound bites or people or gurus or people who have these ways and answers without really becoming individuals, not just for ourselves, but transpersonal individuals, but without just following forms and ways that aren't properly understood. So that's why I think it's such a hugely important and it's also contested word and area, and it's good that we question it. What is a ritual? How can we understand ritual? And how can it not just be a trap into forms of following kinds of consciousness, herd consciousness?
As I hear you, you're making mainly two arguments, and I think they have a relationship. One is the argument of appropriation, that we are, as Westerners, white people, who went through the experience of Western Enlightenment, modernity and postmodernity, in our, if I may say so, emptiness, go back to and appropriate all kind of whatever rituals, maybe coming from Brazil, maybe coming from India, maybe coming from the Aborigines in South Africa, without even being able to touch beyond the surface what this ritual is about. Yeah, but following the forms, feeling some relief, but basically appropriating something that is not part of us. The other,
without bothering to go into enough depth, just before you say the other one, because the forms are realities, actually. That's why they worked. And the forms still have a power. So if you do some kind of special circle work around a fire, and like a Havan, or in some way, it will have some effect. But you maybe, as a culture or as an individual, the effort has not really been made to enter the depths of this, and maybe it's not even possible, and so it is appropriated, it's taken on, and without often even the acknowledgement really of where it comes from, or the invitation or the request. So I really thank you for also using that language, because it can be, not always, but can often be a form of really of appropriation and exploitation.
The other argument that you brought forth
Mm-hmm.
is interesting, something like a counter argument. And it's around the word following. And I think here Beuys and his work plays a central role. And Beuys' understanding of the eye sense, of the creativity, and the free expression that is the opposite of following. And in that sense, there's something where following the forms as natural cultures are immersed in is something that in our particular Western, but not only Western, evolution of consciousness and culture got transformed to something where there is the finding and also the necessity of recognizing there's something in us, and you can call it with Beuys our eye sense, where we are meant to ask from ourselves. And that's a different place than just following.
Yeah. Yeah.
And ritual in just following something also has the danger to forget oneself in one's own capacity to be and create and be creative out of oneself.
Yeah.
One could say that both is at the center also of the problematic of our culture, because this capacity to do that is also part of how we got alienated from the forms of nature. And maybe the question is, how can we integrate this in a new way where our eye sense is not separated from the forms, from the sacred forms of reality, but our free response to that. And maybe in that, a ritual could have a new meaning that is not void of our individual and collective creativity, but is connecting at the same time with the forms that we are embedded in.
Yeah, that's very amazingly put. Yeah, I think that a huge amount of the work in 7,000 Humans is to activate, not just to enable people to activate the inner field in finding the question and the commitment, but to activate an awareness of the eye sense. And you could say on a simple level, that is just this first act of showing up as a sun, as the glowing potential that you are, showing up as a sun on the map. One first act. And then gradually coming to see how the importance of your own self-awareness, which is different from egocentricity. And we often jettison the one, we mix them both together. We must become eco-conscious instead of ego-conscious. But actually, there's a self that has to not only become aware, but in fact, this self has to show up on the planet, make some little act. In this sense, it's a digital act, register, put your sun on the map. And then you're invited to do some more acts. If you can, if you want to, find a local anchor point, make a commitment, find a question, share a question. And gradually in the process, you get a sense of how this activated inner field of the self, the self-awareness is actually contributes a substance to the wider field. And without that, there's nothing really to work with. Without that, there are a few leaders, thought leaders. Old forms were called gurus. Now we've got thought leaders, whoever the people are, politicians, people who are maybe celebrities, pop stars, who make certain calls that are often followed or resisted. The resistance of those big calls is a kind of another kind of grouping, following. And so how do we, really one of the challenges, and really Beuys saw it like that, and it is in the field of social sculpture, Steiner saw it like that, Schiller saw it like that, it was already there. How do we do this work of becoming conscious persons who show up to ourselves and to any situation without it being confused and throwing the baby out with the bathwater? When we mix it up, we conflate it with this idea of, we're so egocentric. So 7,000 Humans is very much about this opportunity of seeing if this makes sense to people as well, if they can feel it. And what's been amazing so far is people this seems to be one of the things that's exciting them, that they are there as active individuals, becoming more and more active, partly through their exchanges with others. And gradually in that process, a field, you could say, begins to take root, a social field, a bit like the mycelium, the natural mycelium that grows in the forest, that supports and sustains and grows between the trees, helps them communicate, and the plants. And in a way, just one more thing to say, these are all, everything that I've said is actually a question. Is this so? So the whole of 7,000 Humans is like one big global experiment together to not just check, are we right? Is this right, what we are proposing? But really, how does it work? What's this about? How does the individual connect with the build new forms of community, etc., etc.? There are many, many questions in 7,000 Humans that we're now walking with together, in addition to the questions that each individual generated and shared, and out of which 14 were chosen in a kind of democratic process. But there are these underlying questions. You could say 7,000 Humans is one big set of questions that we are inviting people to enter into together, but not just think about them, but through experiencing the growing and unfolding process. So maybe by the end of the first cycle, it might go on, it might not go on. It looks like it's going to go on because it's generating such a big wave of interest and engagement. But if it goes on, it feels like it's a big sphere of a collaborative, you could say, people's research, citizens' research, research about the connection between our relationship to the other than human world and the spiritual world. It's research on so many levels, and the areas for people to pick up and get involved in, and that will come in the fourth phase that we've called making social honey, where people start to re-enter these questions they've discovered through the experience of being part of it. So I think that's what I like about it. It's created an arena that's offering opportunities to explore, to research really in practice, individually and together, these underlying questions, as well as the questions that have been selected to work with once a week.
It may be a form of research,
yeah,
but it is a research of a different order. And I think this is important. It may be a form of democratic process, but it seems to be a democratic process of a different order. And that starts with the connection to a tree as a partner. It changes me in my, whatever you want to see it, my psychology or my spirituality, or at least in my existential being, to do this with a tree as a partner. I think differently. The usual university way of how I think research doesn't work this way. So research and the meaning for research changes.
Exactly.
And that's a participatory involvement of knowing where the way we move these questions come from a different place that we are used to do that. And that's part of the power that you may call ritual, may call different, but it is this connection to these other spheres. And you said something that also stood out for me. You said that this field lands in us. And you said this particular after really you made a point how the eye sense and the capacity of the eye sense is a central piece of the architecture of all of this. So there are two parts. One is this eye sense, and then there's something that you call a field that lands in us. So how to go about this polarity? There's me, there's this field, I can feel that in being connected both to the more than human world, but also connected between us. There's a field reality and there's this eye reality. So how do we interact and how do we create, respond to the questions that you're raising? In that you do something, and maybe the least controversial way to say it, you do this as an artist, that changes us, how we interact with each other and in a more than human world. And in that sense, it also changes the understanding what research means, what knowledge means, and all of that. And that seems to be decisive for what we're doing right now. In this, at least, sorry if I use this word, what one can say, what you're doing seems to be psychoactive.
Yeah, I think that's very nice way to put it. It's a huge psychoactive space. And imagination is a key part of psychoactive reality and potential. And this beautiful image of us in the field, but the field in us. The sphere of imagination is like a medium. Once we enter it and we can work with the images that are in 7,000 humans, the images of the growing eye through every interaction in the field, and the field growing in us. This is all possible because of this stream. I mean, it's in a way back to that thing about the root of the word ritual and river, ritus, rite, that puts us into the stream of being. It's actually the stream of meeting. It's where it's possible to meet with this other than human being, this tree partner, and to perhaps develop what Goethe and Beuys called new organs of perception, new ways of understanding and receiving, new humility also, and yet also do the work on ourselves, knowing that we're different, not higher, not lower, not insignificant, but a different one of Earth's creatures that has different capacities, very, very difficult to develop because they're not, because we can go outside of our instincts. So all these recognitions that can also come together in this relationship, if one can really develop a relationship with this partner, the partner who can't physically move away, we can move away, we can ignore it, we can ignore what we do in the world and to the trees, our partners, but we can return. The trees are waiting for us. It feels like the trees are waiting for the humans. They've made this space for us, like in the old village where the tree was the place where people gathered to speak and talk. Now we can gather either just oneself with a tree or bring your friends and family, even like of old, but gather to become conscious of this amazing potential for this relationship. Yeah. So.
As you're describing this, maybe you also want to say what in concrete form are you inviting people to?
So what we're inviting people into is a step by step. There are 4 phases, and the first stage is you register, and not just in a technical way. You put your sun on the global map. You're then invited, once you've done that, to find an anchor place on the planet, which could be a tree partner. But if you haven't got a tree partner, partly perhaps because you're moving, perhaps you have no home, perhaps you live on the sea or in a desert, and you have no tree partner, but to find an anchor point, which might be a rock or a physical place, but it could even be a place in you. For example, for me, it's in a dream. So the next invitation is to find this anchor point on the planet, where you can go to meet yourself through meeting the other than human being, and to offer yourself as well in all your humanness and frailty to this world. But a place to, on a simple level, you could say a place to contemplate, place to reflect. And then we're also inviting people to make a commitment, which could be very small. It could be very big. It could be a new commitment, or it could be by simply thinking about what's my commitment, you might realize I am doing my commitment already. So it's also an opportunity to formulate your commitment that might be existing already, to find what it really is. And the last thing we're inviting people to do is to share a question. And even though we've already selected the 14 questions to work with from all the submitted questions for this cycle, we're still inviting people to formulate, find, uncover. These are all uncovering processes. Find your anchor point, your tree partner, find your commitment, find your question. They all require looking in at yourself. And then we're inviting them to participate in these 14 weeks of global assemblies that in Kassel are linked to the Documenta 15. They're part of the Zukunftsdorf 22, which is one of the Documenta partners, and we are being hosted by them weekly. They run the global assemblies in German in Kassel, and around the world people are running local assemblies. So each week people are invited to inhabit, to dwell on a question, to let the question expand inside them, and to work with it individually and locally with friends, family, local groups, projects, but also to join us in the Saturday global assemblies. And from all the insights gained, we're not trying to find answers. We also emphasize that we introduce a practice for how you work with the imagination in the inner atelier, the inner workspace, how you work with the question of the week. So we're not trying to find answers. It's very much in that idea of Rilke's that we should follow the questions, embrace the questions, love the questions, inhabit the questions. And through that process, something will emerge. So it's very much making people aware of how you enable an emergence process. Maybe solutions will show themselves out of that, or answers. And the last phase of 7,000 Humans is about bringing all those different insights together in ever increasing circles, global forums, small circles, to try and see what wants to emerge, what initiatives, what insights, what actions, what wants to emerge out of this wave that was set in motion, all this activation, what's appearing, what's coming to the surface. That's what we're inviting people into.
I just may add, the website is 7000humans.com, 7000, number 7000humans.com. And there you also find a lot of what you are talking about right now. And it is a beautiful and powerful invitation. And I am very curious what will emerge out of that. And I see it as being rooted in what Beuys did there in Kassel. And I see the roots back to Bonifacius and the whole question of our culture. And what you and your friends are doing here are coming, sprouting out of this. So thank you so much for doing that.
Thomas, thank you very much. I really appreciate how you have entered this and seen it and enabled me to share it with you and your listeners.
Thank you.